Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Shadowverse. Today is Monday, September 6th. Starting late today, just woke up late again. My insomnia slash sleep schedule just never wants to be anywhere close to consistent or anywhere close to waking up at the times that normal people seem to wake up, whether they're forced to do that or not. I would seriously wonder if you could figure out what the determined sleep schedule of the average person would have been if it weren't limited for thousands of years based on the need for light. Like you see it in other animals, certainly owls and things, that they don't need to see with light, so therefore they stay in the nighttime. And that's true for many, many creatures, including all the ones that they feed off of. At this point, I'm just going to re-roll this Dragoncraft and Havencraft daily quest because I have no interest in doing that. Although, I guess, on second thought, I could have just played Havencraft. I think that would have been fine, but whatever. But yeah, most humans for thousands of years had to wake up as soon as sunup happened so that they could work the fields mostly to grow food and see what they're doing. And so that has created generation after generation of people assuming that that is the natural state and that is the way people should act. But in reality, in modern time, where we have artificial light all over the place, it makes incredibly more sense to wake up after sun's down and stay with artificial light and cooler temperature, because we are spending far more energy cooling and air conditioning places than we are lighting places. So somewhere around sundown to sun up should be the standard time. And I certainly could see compromises between that thought and the current thought of sun up and sundown. I could see people waking up around noon. Typically, given their own choices, most people do want to sleep in. They don't want to wake up at 6 in the morning. They want to wake up at 10, 11, 12 in the afternoon. It's simply been just one of the many factors in which jobs have forced people to change their lifestyles to accommodate them. There does obviously need to be some level of consistency here. It would be nice if all businesses were mostly forced to stay open at all times and just be 24/7 businesses, but that's less likely to happen. Frankly, change in general is unlikely to happen, and that's kind of the problem a lot of times with everything. But yeah, so I woke up late. That's a long conversation to say nothing other than I woke up late. As for YouTube to speak specifically, all I can really say is if you don't like the fact that the live streams are inconsistent, the pre-recorded footage is incredibly consistent, and you can watch old versions of my live streams on the weekends incredibly consistently at, like, I believe it comes out on noon US Central Time on the weekends. Like, I would frankly really like more people to watch my pre-recorded footage, to the point where if I could become a somewhat successful YouTuber, I could at some point really scale back or get rid of the live streams completely. It would take me less time, certainly, to just look up news and look up video games that came out on Steam, and frankly I could become fairly lax in it and I wouldn't really miss that much as far as the information. Of course, I'm not informing anyone else if I'm not live streaming and doing the news, but also I could probably break it up and just do live streams. If live streams didn't matter, if the YouTube algorithm treated pre-recorded footage the same and promoted it the same, which it doesn't, it heavily still promotes live streams. But if all was equal, then I probably could just live stream on the weekends and go through all the video game news, and I could have more of a curated feed as far as just like saying, hey, I'm gonna get rid of all the hidden object games, all the low effort Russian games, all the asset flip games, all the low quality Chinese games, things that I tend to just say this looks like garbage and close the tab almost immediately on. And then that would leave a week of games worth talking about, and that would be much more in line with what everybody else does. Which at that point that makes my content as similar as everyone else's content, but whatever. Like, you have to balance the amount of time you're putting into an effort versus the amount of reward you perceive you're getting from an effort, and that would be a decision I'd have to make. For the accountability section, still playing The Binding of Isaac Rebirth. Did get some videos scheduled on the weekend, but not enough. Because of the Pinball Arcade series being broken up around October, there's actually just a lot of there really is just a lot of videos that I have that are going to be scheduled in the second time slot, and what that really is going to do is kind of at least temporarily abandon the idea that the first time slot is supposed to be kind of the more maybe kid-friendly, maybe point-and-click adventure type games, and the second time slot is more of the AAA first-person shooter, more popular games. In the past, I had 3 time slots, and like it was too much work eventually just to try and have 3 scheduled videos coming out at the same time. So I just need to schedule everything to the second time slot until we can get past at least December. Yeah, so yeah, I got a little bit of scheduling done. I still need to do some more. I'm running out of time to do that. And then once the scheduling is done, there's
I shall give birth to a new world.
like there's also some more Binding of Isaac I want to play. I am starting to very, very much get close to the end. The only thing here is that I keep making enough success in a day to kind of say, hey, let's keep trying. It is seemingly much more possible that I could get every completion mark for every character, with maybe the exception of the Blue Baby, and I've played the Blue Baby off screen a couple times too. And of course I'm not unlocking the Lost, so I'm not getting any of the completion marks with the Lost character because I'm not even bothering to unlock him until I get the DLC. But my original idea of it being 30 episodes and keeping it tight has clearly gone out the window. My idea of getting to 80% of the unlockables has already been passed. We're now getting closer to 85, maybe even 90% of the unlockables. I am still like 200 coins short of... Well, that sucked. I'm still like 200 coins short of getting the donation machine to 999. I could definitely see taking the Binding of Isaac and making a Binding of Isaac 2 that played much more like a standard RPG instead of a roguelike. In the sense that for every penny you put in a donation machine, maybe that should give you XP or just damage increase by default. So you keep the donation machine to 999 and then all of a sudden the game is way easier. I could see once you've gotten an item 20 times, you should be able to potentially stop getting that item, or level up that item. You could have items certainly that did go more in that direction in which they get leveled up, and the only items that really do that are like the broken stopwatch gets turned into a stopwatch when you put 999 pennies into the donation machine. Everything else is just what it is. But because of the roguelike aspect of Binding of Isaac, you have almost the same potential on the last game you play, 100 or 200 or 1,000 hours in, as you would on the first time you played the game. Like, you can still totally get bad builds, you can still totally just get wrecked and need to hit the reset button and start over. The game gets harder as you beat the bosses, so that it adds more levels and adds more bosses to a certain extent. And the only thing that adjusts for that is the fact that you've unlocked more items, and there clearly is a bit of a tiered unlock system there, because the better items are unlocked by beating the later bosses. But yeah, the very beginning of Binding of Isaac tells you how to unlock characters. It says something like, to unlock Cain, you need to hold 55 pennies at the same time. And then the game never tells you or helps you ever again. It never really tells you how to unlock an item, a lot of which of the items are just unlocked by random coincidence, finding the item for the first time, or just by beating a boss. Alright. I have yet to find a way to defeat this strategy of getting these relics. Yeah. So I'm still playing Isaac. I should be done by the end of this week, though. I've also been teaching myself how to use Kodi as a media software, which I don't know what it was specifically about the Raspberry Pi version of Kodi. It was just a little too complicated. And in all fairness, I think even on the Windows version that I've installed, there is a certain problem with the way you get that first experience when you launch it, as to, hey, I really want the software to just say, pop up a box saying, hey, we need to know where your music is, where your movies are, where your TVs are. It has this kind of split thought process in which it wants a different folder for TV shows versus movies, which means I have had to kind of manually go in and modify a movie for a TV series so it would show up as a special for the TV series. That way it just shows up in the same place, and that's a pain. Like, very, very rarely do people want, if you're watching an entire TV series and then there's a movie in the middle of it, very rarely would people want that to be separated. If you're watching Firefly, for instance, and you have Serenity, you don't want to have to go all the way back to the top tier of the folders and switch between TV and movie to watch Serenity after you've watched all of Firefly. It should be presented and shown to you right next to each other. Unfortunately, in this case, there were already other specials, so using Tiny Media Manager, I believe, I already had a special folder image for specials, so it visually appealed. It made it very visually appealing. Just play a whole bunch of healing cards without a single artifact on the field. That was really dumb. But yeah, Cody is kind of a mess. I'm trying to set it up to have smart nodes is what they're called, which is basically smart filters that would go through TV episodes and get the TV rating systems, which is way more complicated than the movie systems, because you have TVY, TVY7, TVY7 Fantasy Violence, TVG, then you have, I think, TV14, not to be confused with PG13, which is the movie one, and then TVMA, and then I don't think MA goes any higher. I don't think there's an NC-17 at all equivalent. MA is, I guess, supposed to be the NC-17 equivalent on TV. But for everything after TVY7, which TVG is the lowest one, there's also a TV. With TVY, you can also have TVYE/I, which is the educational initiative. So it's the only label that is showing something positive has been added to to the content, whereas fantasy violence or dialogue, which is suggestive dialogue, or language, which is cussing, or sexual content, which is sexual content, or violence, all of those are negative adders, and all of those are added to anything TV14 or above. But then extended cable, like HBO and stuff, has added on top of those more codified 4 markers about 5 more markers, like rape and gory violence, I think is one of them. I don't even know. I haven't finished looking at them all and setting it up, the filters. So theoretically, all of these are supposed to be in the same order, which might help a little bit in the software programming, but the things can be missing. So you basically have to look for these hopefully all completely different letters and make different folders, and you kind of have to do it backwards because the way usually when you have filters work that are nested, and these are nested as you're trying to set up these, as I'm trying to set up these smart modes, is you would basically have to filter for everything that is TVMA to start with, and that'll just give you everything with any that starts TVMA. Then you need to make a second folder that's nested inside of each of those that says TVMA with no additional content warnings, and then you specifically search for only things that equal TVMA versus starting with TVMA. Then you need to make a different folder that specifically for has violence, for instance, and search for the letter V for violence in the MPA certification. And it's funny, on Kodi they're using for the tag MPAA certification, but actually on TV it's not the MPAA. The MPAA is the Motion Picture Association. So I'm setting up a whole system that very well may never be used by anybody. There should be a different TV certification tag, but it just doesn't exist in Kodi, or probably in metadata and ID3 tags at all. And at the end of the day, all this is really going to do is it's going to let, say, someone who is concerned filter down to a certain folder and go, hey, I'm really concerned about instances of violence. Let me go look in this folder and see all of the TV shows that are tagged as violence and see if I approve that or I don't approve it. Honestly, these should just be default in Kodi, so perhaps at a certain point I will see if I can submit some code to Kodi's, I assume GitHub open source repository to just say, hey, this should be a default node. That way you can handle it. It is actually very nice. The folders won't even show up, the smart nodes won't even show up unless there's content that appears in that category. So theoretically you can have it installed and set up and moving without it being noticeable to the end user. But again, that is still just a side project that I'm falling into, and I always have these side projects, and it seems like they get higher and higher and more. There are definitely some projects at this point that are more on the back burner, and I'm just not really gonna get around to them anytime soon.
It's beautiful tonight.
Let's see. Guess you do this, and then I guess you do this. Anyways, we don't really have as a lot of news, so we should just go through the games left over, and we should be done with this recording since we started late. So let's do that. Here we have a game called Nightmare, which is tagged as an MMORPG. It's too zoomed out. Like, there is kind of a catch-22 in my mind, certainly, with pixely RPG Maker games. And I wouldn't immediately call this an RPG Maker looking game because it's so zoomed out. I would just kind of call it a too zoomed out NES era RPG. Free-to-play MMORPG with no in-app purchases. It's questionable how you can make any money from that. Let's see. David Jaffe, who, if I vaguely recall, is probably not the greatest source when talking about hype, says that the PlayStation Showcase, quote, people are going to lose their effing minds, says the God of War creator. Now, I don't know if David Jaffe really worked on the most recent God of War game. He may be coming out with like a new Twisted Metal game, since he was the co-creator of that. But he also may just be hyping up things. Like, what would make people lose their minds as far as a PlayStation Showcase? A lot of games that are like AAA exclusives that we haven't even seen anything or heard anything about, with absolutely no leaks. the announcement of PlayStation like being acquired and merged with Nintendo, or even just something as simple as cross licensing, so we start to see Nintendo games on the PlayStation. That would make people lose their minds. I doubt that's gonna happen. But honestly, if they just announced more, a new God of War game, if they just announced a new Tomb Raider game, if they just announced a Uncharted game, or or Last of Us 3 or something like that, I don't think there would be anything super surprising there, to the point where people would lose their minds. And honestly, when using that phrase, you assume that in the positive, and it could also be in the negative. It could be people lose their minds because they announced the PlayStation is shutting down and not making any more games, and it is dead in the water as a product.
Let judgment fall. I will protect even in death.
Yep.
I envy you.
But yeah, it's kind of pointless to even be hyped about a presentation that is supposed to build up your hype for games that won't be out. We are getting down to the wire. As much as I'm getting down to the wire as far as scheduling things for October, we're getting down to the wire where you really can't announce any new games for Black Friday, for Christmas season, after the next 30 days or so. You're just going to be so late to the party. There's probably not going to be a week in which some other bigger game is going to come out. Everything here seems to indicate that we will have a slow Christmas season as far as people having money and wanting to shop anyways.
Bear the past, but seize the future.
So I don't really expect too much. PlayStation maybe acquiring a company like Koei or Sega. That would be a big thing, certainly, but even if PlayStation and Sony did acquire a major Japanese company like Sega, it's not like Sega has enough lineup and enough interest at the moment to really pull that off. It would make a lot of sense with like Sega losing a lot of its income from its arcades because of the pandemic, for them to potentially think about getting acquired. It'll also make a lot of sense. There's been a lot of people who have left Sega and other Japanese companies. But I don't know if any employee would really want to work for Sony the way Sony has treated its own employees. So they may acquire the business and lose all the talent as people leave, which, yeah, that would certainly be something to consider also. Sony doesn't succeed with the acquisition of companies unless it can beat Microsoft in the acquisition of companies, and that doesn't happen unless they can acquire some company that has already acquired a bunch of other companies. If all of a sudden Sony owned Embracer Group, for instance, THQ Nordic, that would be a big deal. But that's also unlikely to happen. So, yeah.
My crew stands with me.
And it would be kind of crazy to go the other direction, I suppose, and this is kind of pointless speculation on my part. Really, I shouldn't care at all and just move on to the next story, but if Sony was gonna just say, hey, we're gonna just adjust the PlayStation and make it play PC games, if we're just gonna straight up turn this into PC gaming, that would be interesting, but it would also be such a long process that I don't think it would really work. Like, you can't just flip a switch and all of a sudden say, hey, we figured out how to install Windows, which they probably know how to install Windows onto a PlayStation 5, and you can just have Windows on your PlayStation 5, and then you can try and install and run as many games as you want. They all have these custom chips, and so it's not just that simple as you just install Windows. You're going to have to write drivers that separate the RAM and the video card and all of that, instead of having it be a tightly integrated system. You're going to have to de-integrate it and make it a standard style of content of computer. Alright, I guess we're going to evolve here.
Save yourselves.
Yep. I suppose it is also fair to think about, if Microsoft was to do a presentation in the next few weeks, what would Microsoft really have to announce? Probably nothing. I mean, whenever Microsoft does do its next presentation, it's going to have to get in line all the companies it's acquired. It's going to have to, fairly, I suppose, in the next 6 months to a year, you're going to have to announce some major new project and tease a major new project for Double Fine. You're going to have to do something with the teams that were working on Crackdown 3. You're going to need to make a big Bethesda announcement. Undoubtedly, I guess the Bethesda ZeniMax event, whenever that happened, is probably the one you would want to focus on. So whenever that happens, you would want to make some big announcements and teases around Starlink and the next Fallout game and the next Elder Scrolls game. Some of the other companies maybe will just disappear into the ether as support companies, but I would expect you would want to see a Microsoft, probably E3 presentation next year that really does focus around 3 or 4 of their companies that they've acquired. Whereas Sony does not have that E3 presence anymore, so you'd almost assume that this announcement, this PlayStation Direct, is comparable to that. Okay. What do we want to do?
There is not a soul without sin.
Let us conclude.
Punish the wicked, spare the innocent. Let judgment fall.
Take your victory.
Should have been quicker.
Let's see. Moving on, Video Games Chronicles says Sonic Colors Ultimate on Switch is taking flack for release bugs and crashes, which, yeah, once again highlights a problem with Sega. In particular, is that even their top line character of Sonic and their top line products don't get support and run terribly and are buggy. Video Games Chronicle says it looks like EA's new open world developer should be Neon Black Studios, which, okay. It's the trademark of the name after the new studio from its Monolith boss. A EA open world game, though, is probably not something that a lot of people would look forward to. Like an open world game full of potential microtransactions does not sound intriguing.
Let's speed things up.
Here we go. We have a game on Steam called Dice of Knights, which it's not visually polished enough. It doesn't look like it's much of anything. It's free to play, shared split screen, English only. Yeah, not really worth my time. Here we have a game called Airplane Tycoon. Same thing, not polished enough. This is the kind of game that might be fine for a couple bucks in the 80s and 90s, but in 2021 it's totally not worth your time. And arguably, maybe in the 80s and 90s, $2 would have been the equivalent of $3.74. But certainly it doesn't feel that way. We have much better offerings. And that's totally a good thing, certainly, that we have gotten way better games. There definitely is a level of silliness if you were to try to make the argument that PC gaming was better in the 80s or 90s. There was considerably less quality in most games and a whole lot of shareware, a whole lot of garbageware. And we still probably have the same percentage of shareware and garbageware, but we just have so many more games now that if only 20% of all games are good, 20% of probably somewhere around 300,000 games on Steam is more than enough games to last you a lifetime, whereas 20% of games when there was only maybe 3,000 games is really not that many. Here we have a game called Tag Royale, which looks like nothing. Looks like an asset flip game. Free to play. Here we have one called Synthwave Burnout. I don't know why there are so many Synthwave and Burnout clones. This almost looks like it's something I could visually tolerate, even though it is just full of a lot of neon, and typically my eyes just want to go blind to neon coloring. But no, I don't think so. Early access, 425, bunch of languages. I should mention, yeah, as I was playing Binding of Isaac yesterday, there was certainly a point where I was just not blinking, particularly with my right eye. And I just kept on rubbing my eye, so I really need to rest it for a couple days and wear an eye patch or something. That way it potentially can just relax itself and rest. Binding of Isaac, it kind of sucks in that you really can't break your stride. So every time I have to pause the recording because it's going 2, 3, 4 hours long and go to the bathroom, I come back and I'm usually going to lose because I broke my stride. And if you're doing a run, one run can be 2 hours or 3 hours. And I'm making episodes where I typically do a run that fails and then I do a run that succeeds. Although I did do a run where I succeeded with Eve on the 2 separate paths. So one way to the dark place, one way to the chest. And got all of the completion marks that I needed left on the character back to back.
Today we'll lift some heavy scriptures.
Here we have a game on Steam called Tower Stacker, which seems like you are adding pieces of a building in an alignment kind of Jenga puzzle. Yeah, I don't see enough of a game there. $2.69 English only. Here we have shawarma versus shawarma, which I don't even know what a shawarma is. Seems to me like this is some kind of match 3 game or Tetris game, for lack of a better description. It seems too simplistic though, and it seems to be too focused on being quirky and not being focused enough to explain how the game actually plays. It's English and Russian at $5.99. Let's see, here we have a game called Let Me Die Inside, which looks like a looks kind of like a point and click adventure game. It does have a decent amount of animation here, so I think you kind of have to put this on the follow list. 89 cents, English and Russian. Like, if this was just a standard RPG Maker experience, the text looks fairly small, then there might be a problem with that, certainly. But if somebody's actually trying to do some animations, you can see they're actually moving. These aren't just static characters. They actually have several frames of movement as they're walking around. Somebody's actually trying, it seems. At least to a certain extent, that someone's actually trying. Let's do this.
Look to the zenith, for there I will rise.
Let's see. Next we have a game called Eyeballs Are Your Enemies, which clearly this is just an asset flip game. $1.59 English only.
Make it fashion.
Here we have one called Danger Zone VR, which looks like it's a Minecraft clone in VR, and looks uninteresting. $10 even is an odd price in general. English only, requires VR. Here we have something with Asian letters, and I guess it's called Deathly Stillness. Looks like a zombie game, and frankly looks visually polished enough to actually count. It's free to play, it's single player, it's English and Chinese. So I'd have to consider this, or just ignore it and say check it out because it's free to play now, and I don't really need to criticize this. Says this is a boring third-person zombie game with no plot. Please don't have any high expectations. This is a game I made for the tutorial. There's no gameplay, no plot, pure entertainment. Complete the quest to kill all the zombies. It spent only 17 days. So once again, this is an example of, for lack of a better term, a student project, or at least something being sold in as a student project, and I mean sold colloquially since it is free to play. But then you're spending the $100 to put it on Steam for what reason?
The things I do
Like,
fashion.
the problem here, more than anything, is the fact that there has now been established this concept that one particularly Chinese developer can make something that looks really good, and then that gets people overly hyped about that really good looking game, and then all of a sudden it changes from, well, this is a project that maybe I'll put some updates to but don't expect a lot, to all of a sudden now this is a project that is being run by a big corporation secretly. Like, I can't help but assume that there's just frankly some dishonesty going on here, and some of these games are being sold as indie games, and that's not just Chinese developers. I think a lot of people all over the world are saying it's a single developer when it really wasn't. And I think even if you go to like Binding of Isaac, you kind of had that feeling originally that Edmund McMillan was programming all of the Binding of Isaac, when really he was just a concept in the artist guide. There was someone else who was programming it, and now there's a whole Team Nicholas of about 10 people that are working on the Binding of Isaac.
But make it fashion.
And then if anything, now that there is about 10 people working on Rebirth and the DLCs of Binding of Isaac, the game actually needs more work to justify those 10 people, or they need to be working on another game, which maybe they are.
Ladies and gentle ghosts.
It's also a little unfair, but I don't know how to address it in my mind, that I would be willing to highlight a student project if it really is students going to college, but I'm not willing to highlight what is effectively a student project when it's somebody that's just new to the industry, making a game as a tutorial. I guess in part I could make a very good argument to not highlight zombie games and asset flip games, which is probably all that is. So that's one way it could be addressed. Another way it could be addressed certainly could be just a factor of there's a difference between a school assumedly paying the income, the $100 to put a game on Steam for someone's promising future, versus a random person who thinks they're going to get into gaming on their own without going through college. Although I really hate to respect the college system in any way. So yeah, in this one case, I guess I ignore that game because it's a zombie first-person shooter, and it describes itself as a boring game. And if you're going to tell me a game is boring, I'll just believe you and not play it. But in the future, there will be a point where we start to see poorer countries and poorer people in general that making what are effectively student projects and putting them on Steam, and even though they're not going to college and not paying the thousands of dollars to get a degree, which I shouldn't respect anyways, particularly in programming. There's very, very little good argument that programming colleges are doing very well as far as educating people to program. They're doing alright usually, but they tend to be pretty bad and pretty behind the curve. Moving on, we have a game called Wild West Rogue, which seems to be a top-down twin-stick shooter, kind of like Smash TV. Doesn't look like it has enough variety to it, though. $2.39, English and Russian. Here we have a game called Unnatural Freaks Wolf at Evergreen, which doesn't look like anything of interest. It's tagged as a VR visual novel, I guess, free to play. English only. Let's see, so 0 wins, gets us 30 gold. And clearly I'm not doing these arena runs or anything like this anymore on days off. I'm not spending any of that extra time that I might have playing Shadowverse. Yep. And I forgot to liquefy these extra cards, so we'll do that. Yeah. My hope is when I can jump over to the next collectible card game, that it has weekly challenges instead of daily challenges that are much more reasonable instead of the daily challenges that Shadowverse has. Moving on, we have a game on Steam here called Angel's Tale and Extraordinary Love, which looks like a visual novel. It's not widescreen. I'd say this animation style kind of is a throwback to more of the 90s animation style. And this language looks more... You
must
I
die.
don't think this is Korean. Is this Filipino? Or maybe Indian? Yeah, it definitely feels like this is an animation style that would have been inspired by anime from many years previous. It definitely is not the moe anime style that has been prevalent, and now even the moe anime style has kind of shifted. There was... This is free. What language is this? Thai. Yeah. Okay. There was a story I saw, and it has nothing to do with video games, but of some local TV station rebroadcasting a Japanese anime, and it's being rebroadcasted in such a like conservative country, or following such conservative values, that it's just horrifically framing out all of the females in general. It's like a scene of a girl holding another girl's hand gets zoomed in so you only see one girl, and then it gets zoomed in until you see the other girl. So like even hand holding is just too much. They're on the beach, and they're wearing just standard beach gear you'd expect people to wear as far as bikinis, nothing revealing at all. Like basically this is a kids show in Japan, and they're just censoring it completely. They're removing girls in the background. They're focusing on the boy, who I don't even think is the main character. Yeah, and at a certain point, it really gets questionable as far as why you'd even try to air a show like that in the first place if your censorship rules are that extreme. Yeah. Even in the early days of anime coming over to the United States, it was never that heavily censored. The biggest incidents, I think, of censorship that happened was Card Captors, which drastically tried to change Card Captor Sakura around so that the main female protagonist was not the main female protagonist at all. And that was about it. Sailor Moon had some levels of censorship, but there was enough episodes that were eventually aired that that level of censorship wasn't episode to episode changed like Card Captors was. Changed, just a totally different name. And of course Robotech is like the amalgamation of three things, and Power Rangers is completely made up whole cloth. So Power Rangers is not like Super Sentai being translated or edited. It's just the fight scenes from Super Sentai with scenes added to make it Power Rangers. So it's an amalgamation product also. Yeah. And ironically, the Japanese have adapted the idea of censoring the TV broadcasts quite a bit of their own anime, not because they really have to so much as they want to try and trick more people into buying the Blu-rays. The airing on TV is basically a paid promo to get people to pay like $45 for 2 episodes on a Blu-ray. So, yeah. But yeah, if anything, I would just say there's kind of some translation issues more than direct censorship that people complain about, and there was just always a lot of pushback as far as any censorship as far as anime. Sailor Moon did definitely lose like an entire season series, and they definitely changed a couple of the Sailor Scouts from being lesbian lovers to being cousins, which is a weird choice in the first place, but whatever.
My place is on the front line.
But yeah,
I suppose I've lost some of my edge.
generally what they would do in America in the early days, and you almost have no censorship nowadays, because there's no reason. People just go and pirate the movies if there's even a slight hint of censorship, or
Smiles are the best medicine.
but there never was just an insane framing out that was so obvious anyone would know it was censored. And of course, on the other hand, it's kind of hard to complain about censorship when there's so many other things to complain about these days. But it is something to always keep an eye on. Censorship in any form or fashion, whether in entertainment or otherwise,
Call on me again.
is a danger and a boulder that just continues to roll downhill. It is literally a legitimate argument of the slippery slope argument. And frankly, I think at this point, anyone who says that the slippery slope argument is just an exaggeration or not something that you really should concern yourself with is probably wrong, because it does seem like the slippery slope always does slip. Like I've yet to see a situation where somebody's made a slippery slope argument and then somebody did something that was slightly offensive and didn't take it further. Moving on back to video game news. Kingdom of Assetia, the clicker game, which basically the game is telling you it's an asset flip game. And it looks like garbage. Early access, 89 cents. Here we have From Earth to Heaven, which looks kind of pretty. I'm not sure. It's tagged as a 3D platformer.
Swoop in and claim
This might
glory.
just be one of these parkour jumping around, but even if it was, it's slightly more polished than most of these parkour jumping around experiences. There may not be enough of a game here for what this is, because this kind of does just feel like it's a infinite runner. At a certain point, making a 3D version of Getting Over It with Benet Foddy and having you jump around does start to feel like an actual game. There was also the game Grow Home and Grow Up, its sequel, that had you climbing up an ever increasing platform in the sky. So it wouldn't be too far from that idea to instead have characters jumping. Let's see, yeah, this is rated positively. 559 English, allegedly full audio. I have to put this on the follow list. There might actually be an experience here. What I think I probably would say is I'd like to find some collectibles of some sort here, but we're also seeing a lot of variety in the assets. So even if this was an asset flip game, they've flipped so much assets at this point that it becomes kind of an exception to the asset flip rule. A lot of this platforming stuff would be just basic stuff that you would expect to see in like Alice Madness Returns also. And on plenty of other games.
Envy you.
See. Next we have a game called Night Darkness, which just looks like it's a low polygon first person shooter. $1.19, English only. Here we have a game called Eternal Warfare, which looks like a real-time strategy game. Yeah, not really polished enough. I would have a hard time justifying playing a real-time strategy game that isn't Red Alert series, since that really is just the top tier to do. Let's go ahead and just keep on trying to play until we get victories. Here we have a game called Verdict, which looks like nothing. It's tagged as an MMORPG, free to play. Yep. I can't even tell what this is, let alone how you'd play this as an MMORPG. It seems like a very low quality visuals for an MMO. Here we have one that's all in Asian languages, which looks like it's just a Chinese cell phone game. Free to play, Chinese only. Here we have a game called Skeleton Troubles, which looks like a precision platformer. Or maybe just a platformer. Regardless, there's far too many screenshots here that are not actually even showing the game, which tells me there's no game here. $2.99, English only. Yeah, we have a game called Alien Hunt from the same person doing the exact same game with just a different skin. Alright, so we have a new person on the storefront just taking the piss, for lack of a better term, and making light of their releases and the quality of games that should be on Steam. Here we have Thuko Thea Defender, which is clearly just a tower defense game, for $3.99. Here we have a game called My Best Nightmare, which is tagged as a point-and-click adventure. I kind of am a sucker for point-and-click adventures, plus it's kind of hard to immediately dismiss point-and-click adventure games. This does seem to be a little too zoomed out for point-and-click adventure, with a lot of blackness around the edges. But then maybe in bigger areas you'd have more. It looks like there is actually more animation here than you would expect. $2.54, English and Russian, is also fairly cheap, so I think you have to put that on the follow list. Here we have a game called Chicken Defender, which is some kind of tower defense game but using animals, which I guess there's something to that idea. Plants vs. Zombies definitely made tower defense as a concept better, although Plants vs. Zombies is more of a strategy game than an actual just tower defense game. But I don't see anything here of interest. This is 99 cents, English only. Here we have a game called Towers Incorporated, which looks like nothing of interest. Just a tiny tower clone, $9.99, way too expensive. Here we have a game called Bright Ball Action, which looks like a sandbox, low-effort Chinese game, if I was to guess. $8.39, English and Chinese. Here we have one called Hammerheart, which is a early access Vikings roguelike game. I kind of like this animation style, although I don't know if this animation style would ever work in video games. It would almost work better as a cartoon, and maybe not even as a movie, animated movie. Because, yeah, this softened, low-detailed animation style only kind of makes sense if you can make something else way more important. And zooming in when you have dialogue helps a little bit, but from scene to scene, there would have to be something more important on the screen. Some kind of heads-up display or something that you are controlling and making use of, so that you wouldn't just visually focus in on this softened animation style and realize that it looks pretty bad. $15.99 is too expensive, English only. Yeah, if this was, say, like a card-based game, and there was just cards you were playing, and that was controlling the people, and you were playing against an opponent, that would kind of work. Hand of Fate kind of pulled that trick off fairly nicely, where the fighting in the section, the fighting elements were not really polished and weren't the main focus of the game, so you barely saw them in the game, and then you start to just instead focus on the cards in Hand of Fate and how that all plays out. I could do this.
You're in good hands. You're in good hands. You're done for.
There we go. So, probably the biggest story, and this is definitely not a story that you would want to have talked about in general, is around video games. And this is certainly something that GameDeveloper.com themselves invited, because they were asking people to comment on the new Texas anti-abortion law. What I don't think they were expecting, though, was for anybody in the game industry to support for, or spout support for the Texas anti-abortion law. Unfortunately, for GameDeveloper.com, and probably Tripwire as a company, the Tripwire boss has voiced support for the Texas anti-abortion law, and immediately the partner studio has cut ties. And I think the partner studio is quoted here saying, "While your politics are your own, the moment you make them a matter of public discourse, you're entangling all those working for you and with you." Which, that is a quote that I think is some good sense, and it really goes to show how we should really embrace the idea that corporations are not people, and that a boss, whether it is Randy Pitchford or Tripwire's boss, should understand their weight of them being the spokesman for the company and not spout an opinion politically one way or the other, even if they personally agree with it. Now, on the other hand, I think there is a legitimate argument to be made that if you truly are anti-abortion, you should not be a slacktivist anti-abortionist. In the same way that if you're pro-choice, you are you shouldn't be a slacktivist on that side either. If you really believe in this, you should be probably more like the politicians who made the anti-abortion law, instead of just sitting back and maybe putting something on Facebook in support of something somebody else did. As crazy as that sounds, or may sound, like, I think apathy in a lot of ways should be punished in any direction. So yeah, I wouldn't have been particularly upset, and I imagine there are a lot more than the liberal SJWs that mostly make up of the game developers. I bet there's a lot more quiet, more Republican, more conservative people in charge of businesses in general, and in charge of game companies or working in game companies, and they are just simply scared to speak out. And this is kind of a great example of why they would be scared to speak out. So yeah, I bet there's a lot of people putting a lot of support there. And I'm trying desperately not to inject any opinion of my own into the story. So, as a news story, while trying not to repeat any opinion that GameDeveloper.com has, I will chalk this up to the boss of any company should not voice support for any law, really, other than maybe a law that directly affects video game companies specifically. While arguably this anti-abortion law kind of is only going to affect every Texan almost equally. So it is Shipwright Studios, that's not even being named in the title, that has cut ties with Killing Floor and Maneater developer. And certainly at this point, I don't immediately think to myself, I don't want to play Maneater. I still would want to play Maneater. I have covered Killing Floor. I might at some point go back and cover some more of it. This really, in my opinion, I think is just an example where it would be really nice if we saw this Tripwire boss voted out as being CEO, but often the CEO of a company owns the company outright, and it isn't a share thing. We may see a mass exodus of employees from Tripwire because he definitely spoke personally, but his word holds weight for the entire employees, and I wouldn't be surprised if you quickly see a ton of employees just leaving there. I think particularly liberals and SJWs really don't realize how many rich people are more conservative and more Republican and do fall in that level of support for that kind of opinion. I think a lot of SJWs also kind of live in this fantasy world in their own mind where everybody agrees with them, and anyone who doesn't agree with them is just every single ick word, racist, homophobic, and they just go down the whole line and accuse anyone who doesn't agree with them on any subject of being all those things. And it is part of kind of the hysteria, and there's definitely hysteria on both ends, but there is a level of hysteria that SJWs have where they think everybody agrees with them, and they didn't even consider that there might be people in their very same room or their very same positions that doesn't agree with them. And I could certainly go into the more detail as far as the Texas anti-abortion law. I could mention that I believe it's the Satanic Temple is going to try to challenge the law on religious freedom. The law itself seems to have been written very intentionally so it can't be challenged, or it's incredibly hard to challenge it. The law seems to be, if not something that shouldn't be disallowed by the current existing rulings, it should be disallowed in general. The idea of having a law specifically written in such a way just to get around the obvious fact that it would have been shot down by the Supreme Court had it been written like a normal law at a certain point implies dirty hands, which is a thought in court law where you know you're doing something wrong, therefore you don't have clean hands, therefore we shouldn't be giving you this extra consideration or treating you with kids' gloves.
I feel the emptiness.
But yeah, that really gets more into politics and really has very little to do with video games. I'm a little surprised we haven't seen Randy Pitchford put out anything at all, but I think maybe, just maybe, since we haven't heard anything stupid from Randy Pitchford lately, he's finally gotten the message that he just needs to stay silent. If anything, I would say Randy Pitchford, who, like, I'm using him as an example, he hasn't done anything to really deserve to be talked about, but he really did establish a good example of how not to be a CEO of a boss. I think on the other side, there is a fairly amount of applause to also be said around the other CEOs. Like, the other way this story could have certainly happened is you could have had a considerable amount of CEOs and CEO level people talking about their their disagreement with the Texas law, and if any of that has happened, it has been just on the Twitter like social media manager level, because I'm sure GameDeveloper.com would be more than happy to list a long list of companies who yeah, GameDeveloper.com would have been more than happy to put a long list of games out of companies that would have put out support or put out anti-support, for lack of a better term, against the Texas law. And then the second biggest piece of news, I guess, is Sony has done a U-turn on the Horizon cross-gen plans after backlash, saying free PS5 upgrades will now be offered. Quote, it's abundantly clear that the offerings we confirmed in our pre-order kickoff missed the mark. And then the GameDeveloper.com is continuing to interview, I guess, the former PlayStation boss. He now claims rising development costs means franchises will in the future. I think this might have been the same article we had already talked about. Again, it kind of doesn't matter what the former boss of PlayStation really has to say, because he's not the current boss of PlayStation. Here we have a game on Steam called Dirge, which looks like it might be a decent horror game. But at a certain point, I just don't think I want to see first-person shooting horror games in mansions anymore. Like, Resident Evil has just done that dirty. This looks like this is more of a multiplayer, player versus player game too, and the consistency of the art seems to be in question. Yeah. Well, this is not even out yet, so I'll just close that tab. Here we have a VR version of the Electric Wands game, where you have to take a electric wand and not touch the sides. It looks terrible. In VR, this might make some sense. Personally, I've always felt like this electric wand game was stupid. Kind of designed to make you fail. Designed to tense up your muscles and make it kind of impossible to win at. But yeah, I could see it in VR maybe making some sense. $4.99 English only, but it would have to look a lot prettier than that. Here we have a game called Falling as Lighting, which that doesn't make sense as a word, as a sentence. And it doesn't visually look like much of anything. Maybe a card game of some sort, but I don't even know. Plan and build a deck of cards to represent your government. Free. Maybe it was supposed to be failing as lightning, but even that doesn't make sense. Whole bunch of languages. Doesn't seem to speak English really. Then we have a game called Meseta Minor Codename, which looks like garbage. Looks like some low effort troll joke game. 99 cents. There. Yeah, we have a game called Yarn, which looks like nothing of interest. $3.59. Yeah, we have a game called World of LOL, which looks like nothing. Man, we're just getting a whole bunch of nothing. Free to play, online PvP, English, French, and Spanish this time. Here we have a game called Super Arcade Football, which it's interesting that the soccer game is on ice. The idea of playing soccer on ice seems like a crazy thought. You can see it's mixed already, so we can just dismiss it. $5.99, single player, English and Italian. Here we have a game called Dinner Bros Incorporated, which, yeah, it seems to be a collection of mini games that I don't think I'd want to play. The problem with this game is that it would be possibly like a WarioWare game, so the low quality graphics might be excusable at that point. It says it's a party game for up to 4 players. Yeah. I guess if it is a party WarioWare style game though, I still probably at that point just can't play it. I think that's probably too much to ask for. No, that's just not the type of game I'd cover. Here we have a game called Temple with Traps, which is way too brown in its color palette and looks like it's basically nothing. You're just clicking on things, almost like a minesweeper. Find 15 stones hidden in the temple is what it's supposed to be. $5.99 is way too expensive. Here we have a game called World of Mini Monsters, which looks like an asset flip garbage game. $6.29. Man, we really are just running into nothing but garbage games. And I imagine as we get closer towards the end of the year, we'll see more of that, not less of that. World of Paranoia looks terrible. And they're only showing this small circle of animation in the middle. $6.29 English one. This is the kind of gimmick you would have in early 80s PC gaming where your video card just could not render a full screen. But that long since has not been the case.
There is not a soul without sin.
You are done for.
Punish the wicked. Spare the innocent.
At least we got our
Let
mark.
judgment
There
fall.
we go.
Talk more later.
Let's see. Next we have a game called Hope Trigger, which seems a little rough in the animation. A little just soft. Really soft imagery. And yeah, no heads up display when it probably should have a life bar at least. See, I like this drawing, but clearly they couldn't translate that into something in the actual game. Early access English and Chinese. Note of that. By the way, I was able to get uBlock Origin to get rid of the red line while I'm scrolling down. There was not a setting in the invisible scroll bar set up. But yeah, I have now fixed that so that when I scroll down, it does not show the item. There seems to be basically no way to turn off the black pop-up when you're hovering over a link. That's for security reasons. And I turned off the other minimal scroll bar on the side here, so I actually have some more pixels I could reframe everything by, and give back those pixels for whatever they're worth. There almost never is anything in these last 20 pixels or so over on the edge here on the right, so it doesn't really matter, but yeah, we could give that back, and I'll have to adjust that later. Let's see. Do we want to do this, or do we want to just do this?
At least we got our mark.
Here we have a game called Mr. Trimp, which seems like it's kind of just not a nothing game. Yeah.
Scouting's my middle name.
So it just seems like nothing.
Uncharted desert away.
$29.99, English only. Here we have a game on Steam called Lucky Joe, which might be a Contra joke. It might be an actual Contra clone game. I think this one actually probably does deserve a follow, because I could see this actually playing and working. And this is kind of the first game we've even seen today that even deserves a little consideration. $7.19 is fairly expensive, English full audio. But yeah. I did get my new controller. I don't know if I talked about that. There isn't really a lot to say about it. It works. It
We'll lift some heavy
clearly
treasures.
addresses that there was a dead zone drift issue on my old controller, and of course the rubber on the right stick was also broken. It is an Xbox One core controller. I need to put a piece of tape over the annoying light up LED, and it has an 8-way D-pad that's concaved instead, and it has a share button that seemingly does absolutely nothing in Windows without maybe installing Xbox Game Bar or something. So maybe you could map that to do something.
You send this breeze.
Maybe not. Like, there's definitely a case where you have to install and sign into Xbox to maybe customize some of the buttons on the controller, where that should just be built into Windows without signing into Xbox.
I have to stop standing in place.
Here we have a game on Steam called Brain Game, which, yeah, it doesn't look like anything of interest. $5.39, English, Polish, Russian, and Ukrainian. A game like this would have to be very visually polished. It would have to highlight a lot of brain games, not just Sudoku and checkers and some other jigsaw type games. Here we have a game called Hexio, which looks like a minimalist puzzle game. Doesn't look terrible, but it is kind of minimalist. I don't know if I really would want to play this. So I probably should put this on the fall list. $1.59, whole bunch of languages. In a lot of ways, this is kind of just a connect the dots game, more than anything, where you have, from the looks of it, a certain number of connections you can make. Which, yeah, you can certainly take the idea of a connect the dots game and elevate it into something bigger. Let's see if I play this. Probably want to do something like this, but then would that make sense? Yeah.
Best of luck to you.
Do this. And then do this.
A fair a day keeps the doctor away.
And then I guess you do this? Or we're just in the turn here. Yeah. Next we have a game on Steam called Adventurers Guild, which looks like nothing. $4.20, English only. Going for the meme pricing, I guess.
It won't be long now.
Video Games Chronicle has the same has the same story here. Shipwright Studio says it's canceling existing contracts effectively immediately. Now this might get into an interesting point, to not rehash the previous part here, as far as contract law, which probably isn't that interesting to most people, but most contracts do not have a blanket I can cancel the contract for any reason. If video game companies start to put in morals clauses into contracts, that would be interesting. Also, Chivalry 2 developer said it disagrees with the message, and is probably going to stay away from doing any further business with them.
I shall give birth to a new
Or with...
world.
Yeah. Anyways, contract law. Yeah, it'll be interesting. Maybe this contract was already going badly, and it would be kind of a crazy move, cutting off your nose to spite your face type move. But it would be interesting, certainly, if all of a sudden you're intentionally doing something inflammatory so people can't try to cancel contracts with you, so then you can then sue them for a big payout or a big settlement because they're not fulfilling the contracts. If anything, a contract is there specifically for a reason like this, to stop people from flippantly disappearing and stopping doing business with you, and make people be held to their word and follow up and follow through. And I would definitely argue that Shipwright Studios has a contract. They knew at the time of signing the contract that somebody somewhere might say something politically inflammatory. They should have known that. So either they needed to negotiate at the time of signing a contract a morals clause or an escape clause of some sort for the chance that all of a sudden a company would become incredibly unpopular, or they should be held to the contract. And
Say goodbye.
it is not really any better for Shipwright Studios to come out and make their counter statement to another person's statement, when really they should just be focusing on being a video game company and making video games. Their response, obviously at this point, in my opinion, should have been no comment. We do not speak for this company. We do not say, or we do not spout political beliefs one way or the other. We are a video game company. We make video games, and only video games. We don't make political speeches. That way, they don't then have to come back with a response like we're effectively cutting all ties and canceling contracts, which then may lead them into a lawsuit. Like, this easily could be a lawsuit for millions of dollars that they were just tricked into triggering by a person spouting support for a law. Which, yeah, clearly neither of the CEOs, whether it's Tripwire or Shipwright Studios, neither of these CEOs have been trained enough by the lawyers in a business, and I think that is definitely a case for most businesses, but definitely almost all businesses in the video game industry. Like, lawyers just need to sit down, these people, PR people need to sit down to these CEOs and give them real training and say, hey, look, we don't care what your opinion is. If you say this is going to cost the company millions of dollars. Don't say this. Don't do this. Like, businesses should be run by more level-headed people, and if they can't be run by level-headed people, at a certain point businesses should be run by level-headed computers instead,
There is not a soul without sin.
and algorithms.
The real battle begins.
Although arguably maybe algorithms aren't that level-headed either.
Spare the innocent. Best of luck to you.
Sometimes the algorithms seem to be pretty crazy themselves.
Smiles are the best medicine. Feel free to call on me again.
Moving on, we have a game on Steam here called Escape Simulator, which also isn't out yet. Looks like there might be something here. I kind of like the soft CG depictions here. Maybe the color palette's a little too red in a lot of cases. I'd say this 3D model is a little rougher. Seems to be jumping between a space station and a ancient Egyptian temple, which makes me think maybe they are going to make more of these different levels. And they're comparing it to The Witness and Real Mist, which both of those games are at least fair comparisons, although this game does not look anywhere that as good. There is definitely weirdness around making a game like this, in that pretty much anybody who puts in the time can make a game like this. So you're not going to be particularly unique or differentiating until you get into a lot of polish and a lot of narrative story behind it, and just a lot of gameplay behind it too.
This is where I truly shine.
Let's see. But yeah, when that game actually comes out, I'll put it on the fall list. Video Game Chronicle has a continuation, I guess, of the story. The game grading firm WADA's co-founder is accused of selling a large number of its own games. WADA's policy is for employees to not sell games in the case of fraud or conflict of interest. So he's been accused of selling games for high prices on eBay. And then this is weird, it just says proof. And then journalist Seth Aberson reports that while clearing boxes at his house, he discovered a note included with a game he'd purchased from eBay. That in the sum of the sales note told him to email Mark Haspel at redacted.com. I'd assume the redacted part is probably easy to guess. This would be the part that should be the part that's redacted. Aberson realized that he had purchased the game from Mark Haspel, one of the co-founders of WADA, and then looked at his previous purchases and realized he'd bought 3 in total. So yeah, there is some weirdness certainly there, where at a certain point, if you own video games and they're collectible shape, and you want to sell them, I don't know how you sell them and still work for the company. If anything, I would kind of guess that you would need to have disconnected yourself and disassociated with any ownership of any collectible games before you started working for a company. There is definitely a listing here from the person that they're claiming is the co-owner of WADA, and you can see here there are very high prices, which by default on eBay, I imagine 2,500 or best offer is just a default request. But you can also see that everything here is definitely listed and rated, and in one of these WADA cases. Yeah, and I don't know of a real way to go into that with clean hands, again, to use that phrase and that mentality when you are the co-founder of a company. On the other hand, it totally makes sense that if you are a collector of near mint or mint quality video games and there is no rating corporation that can verify that something is in near mint or mint stuff, and you're sitting on what could potentially be thousands if not millions of dollars worth of games, it would totally make sense that that would be the kind of person who would then co-found a rating company. At a certain point, if WADA did just lose its reputation, and really it's established on its reputation alone, then there just needs to be another corporation that shows up to rate things, another truly independent business. Because there is always going to be a need for rating games if there's ever going to be a marketplace for selling or trading games. Of course, any person can say their game is mint, in mint condition, and claim that, and just hope that nobody asks for a refund via eBay. And that's really the weirder part about this more than anything, is that why would you be buying collectibles on eBay of all places if you want a high quality like near mint version? I would never do that. If I wanted near mint versions, I would be going to like Christie's or some other auction house with a lot of history, something that has worked with all kinds of stuff and can rate all kinds of things and not specifically just be focused on video games. Or I would, if there was a credible and well-trusted website specifically for video games, then I might go there. But eBay is notoriously known for being full of scammers and full of bad products, and PayPal and eBay are notorious for not refunding things and screwing over the purchaser way more than they should. And yeah, allowing just significant amounts of scams to happen as far as Chinese companies shipping things that are not the item that they claim that you purchased to buyers, and then the buyers cannot ship the thing back to China without paying more than the price of the entire item that's ordered. And even if you did ship it to China, they would say they never got it in the first place. So they've just allowed this particular Chinese post scam, which I think that's what it's called, is a Chinese post scam, but it's a good description nonetheless to go on for years.
You're done for.
And I'm sure there are plenty of other scams that exist that eBay and PayPal are facilitating. Moving on. A new Ghost of Tsushima's Director's Cut patch fixes E-Key lighthouses and Legends matchmaking. It's now available for download. Let's see. A new core for Live Retro has been released. The ColecoVision Gear Coleco core. Gear Coleco has been added. So it's for accurate Z80 cores and TMS 9918 emulation, which, yeah, probably most people don't know anything about ColecoVision. Anyways, so it would, but it does show that they've added another core, and Libretto having support for as many cores as possible is great as a upper layer integrating API that is trying to get all of the cooperating emulators to be launchable and usable in one place instead of potentially installing hundreds potentially of probably dozens, not hundreds of emulators, and then launching each of those emulators separately to play different types of games. If anything, learning how the Libretto and Emulation Station or other front ends all work together, and how there are like 4 or 5 different layers of different softwares trying to make it easier and more integrated to do the simple thing of just playing retro games, is a great way to learn how programs in general just work. Because, yeah, that is programming in a nutshell. You stand on the shoulders of giants and you integrate things that have already been programmed to make something more efficient and easy for the average person who just wants it to work. And that goes down as far as helper libraries and header libraries in programming. Nobody, well, maybe there's 2 or 3 people out there on the planet that write in assembly and don't use any header files. Definitely when you're doing embedded coding, you try to limit the amount of header files you use, but you're still not usually going to write things in assembly language. You're going to use a compiler. You're going to use something like C++ or C. You're going to use header files and assistive code, or copying and pasting code from the internet. And then you're going to compile that into an executable. And even at the level of executables for Windows, there's a lot of DLL files that are being used just by default. And so when Windows changes the look of like the Windows elements, the X, the minimize, the maximize buttons, things like that, it just by default changes the look of all games or all apps. So you don't have to go back in there and reprogram your app to make it look like the new art style of Windows. Right. Moving on, we have a game on Steam here called Project Special Forces, which looks kind of visually polished, but then there's just nothing here. It's just a bunch of guns pointing at empty forests and environments. So early access, it's online PvP, it's $2.39, which was way too cheap for an online PvP game, so we can skip that. Here we have Princess of a Fallen Kingdom, which is tagged sexual content and nudity, which I guess I should have checked first for that. Yep, it looks like it's just another low effort JRPG. $1.75 Chinese only. I often question when it's a Chinese only game if there actually is sexual content and nudity. And at some point we may hit a level where there is just straight up dishonesty in the labeling of games because of cultural differences. Like, because if we were at a point where either the Taliban or ISIS or some other severely conservative, religiously conservative group was putting games on Steam, somebody showing their hair, very much in their culture, they would consider that sexual content and nudity. And we really can't accommodate that system and that broad of a range of definition of sexual content and nudity. If anything, I think even like female toplessness in a non-sexual environment, like topless beaches, that is probably more often than not depicted and labeled as sexual content, just because of the United States' more puritanical views compared to Europe's puritanical views. So there already is a fairly large gap between what you would consider should be tagged that way and what you would consider shouldn't be tagged that way. But also, in all fairness, there have yet to be that many video games where you're just on a topless beach for no reason. And the United States does pretty much have enough market share to establish the rules. Of course, that gets into a mob rule argument, where if China did start having enough market share of actually spending a lot of money on video games, all of a sudden a lot more Chinese games would become popular and a lot more censorship from Chinese perspective would happen, or labeling from Chinese perspective would happen. Next, we have a game on Steam called The Endless Summer Search for Surf, which I wouldn't be upset with an actual surfing game, but this just doesn't really feel polished enough. Yeah. And I don't know what you do with a surfing game. I think any surfing game you would make, you would almost certainly have to be an endless surfer where you're just always getting waves and always capable of moving forward. The whole paddling out to the waves and waiting for the wave to hit and all that. That stuff I think you kind of ignore. And the idea of going from beach to beach doesn't really make a lot of sense. Wave Racer is kind of a great example. Wave Racer 64 is a great example of a type of game like that, where you are actively changing what the game is to make it a little bit more interesting and palatable as an experience, and you're making it way more action focused and way more trick focused than you really would ever do with a Sea-Doo. And I think that's probably where you would go with a surfing game also. Search for Surf is $11.24, English only. I'm gonna have to say no for that. This next game looks like it could have been an adult game, but isn't tagged with any adult content. Here we have a game called No Oz Ark, which is a funny pun. I'm a little surprised that hasn't happened before. They're saying it's advanced whack-a-mole game. Save the animals and the girl you love. Seems to be just some kind of arcade game where you're just, I guess, it almost feels like you're brick breaking with like an Arkanoid game, or I don't know, you're just clicking on these things. It doesn't really feel like there's a real game here. And then there's just a lot of focus on an anime angel girl and a low effort character. Yeah. There's also a devil girl. And the cutscene is just showing the boobs jiggling of both the angel girl and the devil girl. And maybe you get to pick between which one.
I I will rise.
is your best girl.
Prominence.
Is that how you treat a lady?
Yeah, you are just clicking on the animals and yeah, it barely even shows any. Alright, so you just click on the animals and then you click on the devil girl to do damage. Which, yeah, that seems kind of like wasteful and stupid. I don't know what you do around the idea of Noah's Ark to really make that work as a game. I mean, the story itself barely works as a story. This whole dress up element here where you can change the looks of the characters. Clearly, like,
It won't be long now.
having any game where you would have to have a whole bunch of skins for different animals and the different animations and movements for a bunch of animals doesn't really make sense. A clicker game around Noah's Ark, I guess, kind of makes some sense. Because then you could just have a flat 2D animation around each of the animals. You could have each of the animals also perhaps give some kind of return as far as resources, as far as like the wood to build the ark and make it bigger. The problem with this too is though you kind of violate the story of Noah's Ark if you have more than 7 of the clean animals, or 7 pairs of the clean animals, I believe is what Noah was supposed to get, and 1 pair of the unclean animals. But yeah, if you're just straight up just adding more and more elephants to the point where you're building a bigger and bigger Noah's Ark, you're not really staying consistently with the story, although that would be funny if it was just a tiny tower clone and you were just constantly adding more and more floors to Noah's Ark and it was just getting higher and higher into space. Yeah, 1 more victory and we'd be done today. But even at that, that's not much of a story. You probably would be more interested in doing a naval type battle game where you're just moving your ship around looking for dry land, which that's barely a sentence in the Noah's Ark's story.
You must die.
But yeah. And then if you try to add a whole bunch of dialogue that wasn't in the Bible, then you go in a different direction. It's really a rough concept to even start with. It just doesn't. You probably take something like Noah's Ark and you turn it into a space story, where you've got like the DNA of all the animals on Earth and all the creatures of Earth, and you're going from planet to planet, trying to reseed life, and you're doing a planet reseeding simulation game, and you're trying to find the right planet. You're trying to grow something like that. Probably makes more sense than anime girls. Like, anime girls are not the answer to a bad game by any means, and more developers need to realize that. Moving on, Gametsu says Focus Home Interactive has rebranded as Focus Entertainment. Probably should have done that a long time ago. Focus Home Interactive was too long of a title and kind of not very descriptive. Focus Entertainment is better. Maybe this means they are going to potentially make some things that aren't interactive, or at least open up the brand so it could make non-interactive animation. They're going to be emphasizing the ambition to offer players unique experiences. Let's see, PlayStation Now has added Final Fantasy VII Killing Floor 2. Bad timing on that. Tekken 7 and more in September. So now you have this situation where tacitly Sony PlayStation is supporting the Killing Floor developer, which I assume also made Killing Floor 2 by just honoring their contract. But I imagine we might see a case here, and it's going to be hard to realize this for a lot of people, but this might be a case where PlayStation actually deserves some applause for just honoring their contract that they already had, assuming they do, and puts out Killing Floor 2 as a PlayStation Now free game, and just stays silent and lets it all blow over. PlayStation, particularly since Sony is a Japanese company, will probably do their very best to avoid any controversy at all if they can get away with it. Yeah, we have a game on Steam called Mini Island Autumn, which I feel like there's been several other Mini Island games, and they all kind of look like this. They are very bright and blown out, but there's really nothing to them other than that. You're just kind of walking in a, I think, beat 'em up shooter game. It's very, very zoomed out, to say the least, and so you really don't have a lot going on. Let's see, yeah. He has a game here called Mini Island, Rain Island, Mini Island, Mini Island, Mix Island, Mix Island, Mix Island Remix, Star Island, Pink Island, and you can see specifically all of these are saying they're excluded because this developer is ignored, because that's all this developer has done, is kind of just flooded the marketplace. He kind of stopped for a little bit there, but he was pretty much every month putting out the exact same game. And is there some crazy possibility that you are actually making $100 for spending $100 to directly list a game over and over again on Steam? Maybe it is that easy to just put out a generic experience and you'll get maybe $100 to $200 profit, and then you do it again the next month, and then you just do it again the next month. And that would be a great example of where Valve and Steam needs to kind of curate their storefront before it's too late and the storefront just gets a horrible reputation of being full of terrible games, way more than being full of good games.
I shall give birth to a new world.
Is that how you treat a lady?
Here we have a game called Virus on Steam, which just looks like a platformer. 59 cents, English only. At least the price is right on this. This doesn't look terrible for a 59-cent game, whereas we see a lot worse otherwise. Here we have a game called You Must, which just looks like a horror game. And once again, all these horror games are so visually polished now that they look decent. It's an interesting idea. Could you have a Silent Hill-like game where you're wandering around more of an open world and there are just creepy monsters wandering around? I don't even know if any of the Silent Hill games were like that, where you were more of an open world and the creepy monsters wandered around. But in watching that video and seeing someone walk near a monster and then just turn around and run away, you kind of know that this sucks as a game, because you can't fight back. It's $1.59 English Russian. They're calling it hide and seek. I don't know if that's the right descriptor or not. But yeah, there is clearly needs to be some more gameplay mechanics there if you were going to do something like that. There was very little news, so We have Gamatsu's The Fist Forged in Shadow Torch launch trailer is now out. Is it really worth it to watch a trailer like this? Not really. Like, this is particularly a weird looking game, so it is just going to come down to whether or not we get the good reviews or the bad reviews from something like that. And then 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim shipments and digital sales have topped 200,000 in Japan, which is actually a fairly low number. Usually I don't even pay attention to anything unless it gets 300,000 sales. Although 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim, I believe, is also a fairly niche game, so it's not super surprising. I think it's kind of a mech fighting game with some visual novel elements. I don't think it is just a standard visual novel. Let's see. Kowloon High School Chronicle has been rated for the PS4 in Europe. It's an adventure RPG currently available on the Switch. So that's maybe coming to the West, but maybe just for the PS4. This might be a hint as far as what the PlayStation Direct is about. If the PlayStation Direct went really crazy into the more Japanese side and just like said, hey, we've got a ton of visual novels, we got a ton of Japanese focused games coming out, we are going back to our roots, we're doubling down on Japanese games, that certainly would make the Japanese happy. I don't know if it does anything for the West though, but it at least establishes a direction for PlayStation that probably is in the right direction. Because if anything, Microsoft, with its acquisitions of more Western companies, they have reaffirmed and reestablished that they are going to be the victors in any battle between Sony and PlayStation. I mean, Xbox and PlayStation, as far as who's going to get the more Western games. Yeah. The only other thing that would be surprising is if at the PlayStation Direct they announced that they've got Halo and all the Microsoft games, and Microsoft is just going to say, yeah, why not? Let's just sell our games on PlayStation 2, which that Microsoft very well may do that. Like, that they're more than happy to sell games on the Switch, and they're more than happy to sell games on the PC. That it's really not as much skin off their back to go in that direction and be less focused on I should have waited till next turn to play that. Yeah, I definitely should have waited, because I could have also couldn't have evolved even if I tried. Let's see. Gamatsu says Conway Disappearance at Dahlia View launches November 2nd. This is a story-driven observational thriller set in 1950s Europe. Let's see what this trailer looks like. White Paper Games. In a lot of ways, this looks like a Rear Window style game where you're in a wheelchair and you're taking photographs, and yeah, that might work. Also, while the animation here is not the most hyper-realistic animation, it looks pretty good considering you probably won't see as much of that as you think, and a lot of it really is just going to be investigating on a flat screen. There was a game, I think it was called Voyeur. There was a live action version of that where you were looking through windows. And yeah, this is kind of an example where you really don't need
And that concludes today's survey.
to use the probably barely even recognized movie Rear Window as a title, and you can take that general voyeurism solving a murder mystery concept and still do fine by it. Alright, so if we play this and heal this, and then we heal this,
A fair a day keeps the doctor away.
and then we evolve this to hit that.
You're done for. Put your legs into each prayer. Gosh.
Let's see, we have a game on Steam here called Rover Simulator, which clearly somebody just made a rover asset and it's been flipped several times, probably 100 times now on the Steam. It'd be kind of hard to even make a game where a rover makes sense. If you were going to make a game where you made like a Mars rover and you were simulating it and controlling it, you almost would have to put it on a completely different planet than a barren Mars. It would have to be, you very quickly find there are aliens on Mars, there's all kinds of life forms, and there's some kind of language or something you can scan and slowly decode. Something closer to like a Metroid Prime game, I would say, where you're playing as a rover. $13.49, English only is what this game is. Yep. But that is pretty much what I would be expecting, is something with a lot more fiction and fantasy around it to make it interesting. And you certainly could make a Metroid Prime game without the shooting, and it would only suffer a little bit by not having the first person shooting. But you could wander around an alien environment, and it would probably be something close to No Man's Sky at that point, but even No Man's Sky has shooting in it. Arguably, the Metroid Prime series probably wouldn't even be remembered if it didn't have Metroid in the name. So, you just have to have a lot of polish to it, a lot of platforming, and yeah. Metroid Prime really shows how games need 2 or 3 different gameplay mechanics, because Metroid Prime has a scanning photo mode, it has platforming, it has puzzle solving, it has secret collectathon stuff, it has first person shooting, obviously, it has a deep storyline of some sort. And it really takes a company like Nintendo to be able to fund something like that, and even at that, Metroid Prime 4 is still in development hell. Next we have a game on Steam called Aurora Hidden Colors, which just looks like an RPG game, although I kind of applaud an attempt here to have more people of darker skin tone in games, because that doesn't happen enough. But you're not really making a good game. You're just making an RPG Maker game. $3.39, English, Portuguese, Brazil. Moving on, we have Bravely Default 2, now on Steam, rated very positively, which I think at that point I have to put it on the wish list. $5.39, English, full audio. And see, this establishes a Square Enix high-level, like, probably originally mobile game RPG that it definitely looks different and probably better than most of the RPG Maker games we've seen. So you have this, you have much better of an argument to play Bravely Default and Bravely Default 2, which is more name recognizable than it is to play a random RPG Maker game, even if Bravely Default 2 is $53.99. It's English, allegedly full audio, so that could also save you a lot of time if you're not having to read a lot of dialogue. And then full Japanese, but the Japanese language is actually hidden way at the bottom here. So you could get the original voice acting, I would assume. The Bravely Default series also has an interesting aspect in that it's kind of from the creator of the Final Fantasy series, or one of the Final Fantasy series, so you could play Bravely Default 1 and 2 way easier than you could play Final Fantasy 13, 13-2, and Lightning Returns, or Final Fantasy 7 Remake, and Final Fantasy 7, which you might need to play both of those games. Next, we have another one of these furry Shakespeare games, Oops All Dragons. Still kind of ridiculous. $8.99, English only. I'm going to just dismiss that. Here we have Lost Kittens Maze Garden, which just looks like a maze. 79 cents, English, Portuguese, Brazil. Here we have a game called Build and Battle, which just looks like a real-time strategy game. It doesn't look terrible. It's a little low pixely, but for, I guess it's a turn-based tower defense game, not a real-time strategy game. Free to play, English only. Yeah. And again, this might be effectively a student project, but it's not outstanding as a student project, and I think that is definitely going to be a factor going forward, is that if I am going to promote student projects, they're going to have to be outstanding looking student projects. And then we have a game called Grapple Hoops, which looks like a player versus player punch and shooting game that has a grappling gun and basketball, which really makes it seem like it's all over the place. Yeah, so you're shooting people, breaking glass, and then you've got a basketball you can throw at people, and then you're dribbling, and once you have the basketball, then you are dribbling and you have a shield. That seems silly to say the least. The basketball hoop is way up in the air. So, yeah. At a certain level, yeah, this kind of idea is just taking basketball to an insane, crazy way. And maybe it's just a desire to include basketball by the creator, or just include basketball as a tag. I suspect a game like this may never actually come out, frankly. It's too complicated and too crazy of a game concept. Alright, let's see, hit this. And play this. Next, we have a game called Fantasy Sliding Puzzle, which just looks like some fantasy images either licensed or stolen from the internet to make a slide puzzle. Nothing of interest there. $1.79, bundled with 44 other items to be $24.26. That's ridiculous. Next, we have a game called Domination, which looks like it's a fantasy horror game. Seems to be kind of all over the place, but there might actually be an experience here. $9.99, English and full audio Spain Spanish. I'll put that on the fall list and give it a chance. Let's see. Still looking for one last victory. Let's see. Komatsu says Nippon Ichi Software President Sohei Nikawa video message on Disgaea series achieving 5 million sales. So they Disgaea as a 5-game series has 5-game plus, I imagine, has sold 5 million copies, which, okay. That Disgaea series is very popular. I tried to play it. I didn't get anywhere with it. It is an example of one of the few series out there that is just niche enough, and it's such a slow style of gameplay that there will just be a decent amount of Western players that would never play it, including me, which is kind of a shame, but I tried, so what can I say? Like, I literally gave it an effort and could not get past the first game, or even significantly into the first game. Let's see, Kunio-kun no Sengokushi Daio Zien Shugoi has been announced. This is a 35th anniversary title. What kind of game is that, though? It's from Arc System Works. Let's see if we get this teaser. Seeing a bunch of, like, flags. I guess that's what that is. So, seems like it's probably a war simulating, a feudalistic Japan style war simulating game, if I was to guess. And then Yuri Killed the Culmination game has a main visual. Now, they've been teasing this game as a shoot 'em up game quite a lot. It clearly has a lot of characters and a lot of visual novel elements, but it's still at its core just a shoot 'em up game, and that becomes the problem that I just wouldn't want to play. See, the storefront Rakuten Taiwan has listed Alan Wake Remaster for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PS4, which that should really surprise nobody at this point. They've made it blatantly obvious that an Alan Wake Remaster was coming. Here we have a game on Steam called Dragon Quest, which looks like it's maybe a math trivia game of no real quality. I'd like for educational games or edutainment games to exist, but they just never have any polish. There really is a gap for a company like Cyan, Double Fine, Microsoft themselves to just say, hey, we're going to make an educational company. It doesn't really even have to make profit. We're just going to keep it in business so that every generation there's a reading game, there's a math game, something out there that's high quality that we can either bundle with Windows or put on sell on mobile phones or sell on PC. Something that has some level of trust, such as Microsoft has a brand name behind it, so that teachers and school boards would actually pay to get licenses for these games. Like, I have no idea what games are really being played in school labs as far as educational games, if any are being played these days. I know Microsoft tried with Minecraft and the Minecraft Educational Edition, so they've already dipped a toe in that, but they really haven't gone heavy with it. Regardless, Dragon Quest here at $279, English, Japanese, and Korean. It's just not visually polished enough. Here we have a one called Vizile Saga XX, which looks like a Chinese turn-based strategy board game, simulation game. $20.99, Japanese only. I was wrong. Let's see. Let's come over here and play.
The blade rats never back down.
Let's see. Next, we have a game called Lullaby Days, which looks like a Japanese only. Maybe it's a RPG / daughter raising simulator. Fairy fantasy simulator. You grow a duckling girl into a hero, so it is a daughter raising simulator. English is not supported, unfortunately. $19.99. Korean. It seems like Korean, we've seen 2 Korean daughter raising simulators, I think, in the past week. So one of these games must be fairly popular, or there must have been some kind of fairly popular daughter raising simulator game that came out, and now we're seeing a bunch of clones on Steam. Here we have a game called Food Delivery Battle, which is probably an asset flip joke game. maybe you could have a concept like this, but this is way too softened, way too blown out visually, and the background assets don't look like anything, and the actual gameplay seems to be at best something like a Crazy Taxi clone, which, if anything, a Crazy Taxi clone where you're delivering food makes more sense than a Crazy Taxi game makes sense. So I'll applaud them on their creativity on that aspect.
A fair a day keeps the doctor away.
So I guess, just out of an abundance of caution, I'm going to put this on the fall list. This probably isn't going to go anywhere. $3.59 is also particularly cheap. It's English and Japanese, allegedly full audio on both. If anything, there seems to be some Mario Kart style rockets and things you pick up, so you can blow up things. So they are taking Mario Kart concepts and adding them to the idea of a Crazy Taxi game, which, yeah, if you were going to make a new Crazy Taxi game, that would make sense. Next, we have a game called Tactical Monsters Strategy Edition, which visually polished, it looks way better than most of the games we've seen today, but its actual gameplay is as a MOBA. I don't see anything here that interests me. Early access, English and Chinese. I guess it's free, but it's online PvP only. Here we have Clarence Goes to the Effing Store, which seems to be probably a joke game and mostly just a visual novel. Now, this art style of paper cutout images might be interesting, but I don't think so. I don't think that's something that would really happen or really work in video game form. It's $2.69. Something like this would be kind of interesting as a fantasy or as a way to draw somebody else drawing something in a video game. There's a couple times in Bleach where one of the characters is being cutesy and like draws their master plan as all the characters being bunnies, and it's just rough animation, rough drawings that you'd expect a high school girl would have the skill at, instead of it looking realistic or anything like the Bleach animation. So maybe you could do that same gag in a game as a way of being cutesy, but that's about as far as you could go with that. Next, we have a game on Steam that's just a bunch of Asian characters. Visually polished, it looks fairly nice. It looks kind of like it's a card-based, like Romance of the Three Kingdoms type experience. This is an example of what is probably a Chinese game where if the Chinese games put their effort into it and embraced their culture and their history and stories that only really the Chinese can tell, this could work really well. But then they would have to put the polish in it, and they would have to support English. Otherwise, this is just solely a Chinese game for Chinese people. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, I'll never know. $5.59, it's not asking too much. Yeah, this definitely looks way more visually polished and less cluttered as far as actual gameplay mechanics than most of the Chinese games I've seen. Let's see, do we play this? Or I think you play this. And then I think we evolve here. And then I think we attack here. And then
You're in good hands.
heal that. That's not what I meant to do. I meant to heal this guy, but I couldn't do that. Next, we have a game called Randy and Teddy Adventure Road, which looks like just a polygonal platforming game. While I will applaud the polygons, it still doesn't really look like an interesting platformer. $9.99, English only. Here we have a game called Peepoo Babble Quest, which just looks like another platforming game. $3.99, English only. We can immediately dismiss it. And I have long since seen the beginning of the end as far as these games, so we're going to be done, I think, a little bit earlier. Here's Golf Club Wasteland. We had seen this before, but it wasn't out at that time, so we didn't do anything at that point. We can see now that Golf Club Wasteland is rated very positively, so I can just immediately put it on the wish list. It's $7.49, which is a little expensive. It has English full audio and several other languages. And arguably that may be the only good game that came out over the entirety of the weekend. Let's hit this. And hit this. And hit this. And I guess we didn't involve this.
That was a fine bout.
Next we have Amazing Chicken Adventures, which looks like nothing. English and Polish, $14.39. Yeah, nothing really to say there. Here we have a game called Debbie Zone. If that's supposed to be a pun, I don't get it. Seems to just be an asset flip first-person shooter. The idea of a Duke Nukem style first-person shooter, a female character, can be appealing, but to put a real game around it and a real character around it, 99 cents, English only. Let's see. Here we have a game called 200 Ways, which looks to be just a puzzle physics game. It looks weird, certainly. There might be a real experience here, though. See, it might be an attempt at, like, the Incredible Machine. I don't know if I can just immediately dismiss it as a marble game. Yeah, it kind of feels like there's actual attempt at making a game here. $12.74, English and German. I'm going to put this one on the fall list. Here we have a game called Theater of War, which looks like garbage. $4.68, English only. Alright, I'm going to jump into one last game and barely pay any attention to it, and that should be the end of this stream at that point. Here we have a game called Dwarf Prologue, which obviously is just a prologue. The idea of playing as a dwarf, misspelled, might be interesting. And there is a level of polish here. So when this actual game comes out, I might consider it. But, yeah. It's English full audio with Chinese subtitles. We'll just wait until this really comes out. There might be something there. But also, I wouldn't be surprised if there kind of is nothing here. It's kind of like a tower defense game. Like destroy all humans or destroy all orcs. What is... Orcs Must Die. Yeah, it's kind of like a 2D top-down version of Orcs Must Die. Let's see. Next we have a game called GTK no Yukarin, which kind of looks like it's a Toho game. Kind of a platforming thing. There's a lot of different gameplay methods here. I'm seeing a lot of different things. $15.99. They're all machine translated from Japanese.
0% fluff.
English and Japanese. Yeah, I imagine we'll probably see we'll probably see more examples of this, of Japanese companies, very small Japanese indie people saying, all right, we machine translated this. We don't know if it really is in English or not, or understandable in English. This definitely does feel like there might be a game here. So we'll see what the reviews say. I'm going to give it a little bit more time though, even though it has 34 positive reviews. That's a fairly high price also. It's not easy. It's definitely not a direct one-to-one translation from English to Japanese or Japanese to English, so machine translation is not likely to do a great job there, particularly depending on what software you're using.
Looks like I'm up.
Why is the string so pricey?
Next we have a game on Steam called Void Tyrant, which looks like it's kind of a infinite runner with card gameplay mechanics. Interesting idea. A roguelike deck builder. There might be a thought here. The visuals are a little rough. But yeah, I could see just infinitely going forward and finding things. And it seems to have kind of a split path where you can go one way or the other. $9.99 English only. Yeah, I'll put this on the follow list. Next, we have Wood Brothers Flying Colors, which just looks like a dogfight, low effort, low polygon game. Early access $5.99, requires VR, English only. Let's see, next we have Dormant Episode Galata, and here we have a bikini-laden character, and it seems like their clothes change, but the actual game is just a shoot-'em-up game. I guess the ship is the character, though, so maybe they get more clothes as they get more armor, or maybe they lose clothes as they get more armor. Like, you could easily create a situation there where the player wants to see the characters in less clothes, thus they are playing poorly and not getting further in the actual game. Regardless, it's a shoot 'em up game, it's early access, it's Japanese only, it's $14.99. So I can't put that on the poll list to even see if it was worth the time, and it probably wasn't. Here we have a game called Endless Beginning Apartment, which just looks like some minimalist shapes, and is tagged as a VR walking simulator. It's free to play. Single player. English, allegedly full audio. Let's see.
All the fluffy hugs.
Just in that turn. Next we have a game called Robot Daycare, which looks like it's just a visual novel.
Hostile life form detected.
Doesn't look particularly interesting. It's free with art book and soundtrack for sale. Single player, English only. I guess if this looks interesting to you, just check it out. There's really no reason for me to put it on the follow list. Here we have Hidden Object Detective Holmes, Heirloom, and this funny depiction of Sherlock Holmes from a Crisp App Studio, and selling their own separate hidden object games. $2.69 bundled with 16 items up to $45.04. Whole bunch of language support. if I was going to play a hidden object game, I might consider this. That is definitely much better pricing for a hidden object game than the $12 that Big Fish Games often is looking for. But I also just don't think there is anything that hidden object games can offer these days that hasn't been done a million times over. Yeah, we have a game called Above the Skies, which is apparently a JRPG RPG. Looking at the tags, and it definitely looks like that. $6.29, English only. Again, I haven't talked about this in a long time, but if you're not supporting Japanese, you're not making a JRPG. You just can't be considered a JRPG at that point. If you're not targeting the Japanese market as your primary market, or at least in equal level with another market, you're not making a Japanese RPG. You're making an RPG that maybe is inspired by the Japanese RPG style, but you're not making what a Japanese RPG is. And we have to hold people to these definitions, or the definitions are going to quickly have no meaning at all.
You're in good hands. You're in good hands.
Let's see. Next, we have a game on Steam called Entangled, which... seems to be a single-room puzzle game. Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's much of a game here. It's VR, it's free, it's English only. It says 3 introductory levels, as if they're going to sell more. This is much more in the lines with what a VR game was thought it was going to be originally, that you'd be just wandering around different places and interacting with lots of different objects, like you were just in an escape room or something. And quickly it has stopped being that thought process at all. Like,
There is not a soul without sin.
quickly now people are just expecting to, by default, have something closer to a stand in one place first person shooter experience, like so many other types of games.
Keeps the doctor away.
Let's see.
Let
And hit
judgment
that.
fall.
And then we have a game on Steam here called Totem Lands, which looks like it's an RPG game of some sort. A relaxing crafting building game where you raise your totem poles. I like the visual polish here, so I might give this a chance. It doesn't look like there's much of a game, however. Early access $8.99, but I'll put it on the follow list. And then we have Fairy Godmother Stories Miraculous Dream Collector's Edition from Big Fish Games, and they want $12.59 for a hidden object game. English, allegedly full audio. And honestly, if the previous hidden object game didn't have full voice acting and it was $2, and this game is $12.59 and it does have full voice acting, it
By your will,
proves to me that it probably is not worth
My beloved
your effort or your money to spend an extra $5 or $10 to get voice acting. I would definitely pay $10 more for a lot of AAA games if that meant I got voice acting, but a hidden object game with voice acting, no, that's not worth it. Let's see. Kosh Media tweeted out that it's been 10 years since Dead Island first released, which really just reminds us that Dead Island exists and that Dead Island 3, I believe, I don't think we even got a 3 in the series, has been in development hell now for like 4 or 5 years. And as a series, Dead Island 1 was liked, the Dead Island remaster wasn't liked, Dead Island 2 I don't think was liked, the spin-off Dead Island games, of which there were a couple, were unliked. There was just a lot of failure, and the creators of Dead Island 1 went on to make Dying Light, so that would be way more interesting to play. And I would definitely recommend people just play Dying Light. And PAX West, I think, just ended. If that matters to anybody. So I am going down my Twitter feed. Just looking for any new news. And then that'll be it for the stream. And we'll be done in less than 3 hours, I think, at this rate. Which that is great news. And as far as winning here, is there anything I can do? Yeah, you hit this. You play this. You do this.
Thus, the world ends.
You hit that.
The world cycles on.
I should have evolved this and attacked this one. But I guess I couldn't have.
I envy you.
Yeah, because I started late, there's basically not going to be any new news. I bet. Only a couple games even came out. Yeah. So, mission-wise, I still would need a victory, and maybe I can get that off screen. There's this tie-in event, which is something I'm not doing. Yeah. And there's basically 2 games I could talk about. It's not even worth talking about them. So that's going to be it for this stream. Yep. And even though that was only 2 hours and 48 minutes, that still feels very long to me. So I kind of wish we could get this down to 2 hours or less. That's going to be it for the stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to friend or follow me, there's a bunch of links down below in the description box. Also, I'm still e-begging for people to donate the Binding of Isaac Afterbirth to me by friending me on Steam and gifting me that game, or you could gift me a gift card if that's easier. You could also support me by clicking on the Patreon link down below in the description. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.